Let me tell you all a story.
On November 9th, 2004, a chance encounter with a single video game would forever change the course of a little boy's life. It happened so long ago that it almost seems like a dream, with details lost to the waters of time and moments loosely connected by hazy memories of emotions rather than exact words or images. It's a story which can never be fully completed, but enough can be pieced together to understand how vital a chapter it was, not just to that boy, but also to the man he grew up to be.
This is not the story of how Bungie made one of the most acclaimed and revolutionary first-person shooters of all time, nor about why it still holds such reverence even today. This is the story of how Halo 2 changed my life. We all know the story of Halo, right?
Not just the story told in its campaign, 7-foot-tall cyborg fights aliens in space and blows up giant space donut, but the story of its success. Nobody paid much attention to it at first, but word quickly spread about just how good it was for a console shooter. Great controls, revolutionary gameplay and enemy AI, and an atmosphere waffling between bravado, wondrous, and foreboding, all owing to its world design and score, would lead to Halo becoming the killer app for the Xbox. But its staying power may be best attributed to its multiplayer, which supported up to 16 players across 4 consoles in a variety of maps and game modes, ranging from a simple game of Slayer in the icy valley of Sidewinder to a lethal game of Oddball in the disorienting chambers of Chiron TL-34. Halo was an epic science fiction story, a fun party game, and a competitive shooter, all rolled into one, and this broad appeal would lead to millions of people buying Xboxes just to experience it. Getting a group of people together for 8v8 CTF on Blood Gulch wasn't just an event, it was a rite of passage.
One which I was totally unaware of. While Halo was selling millions of copies and defining the Xbox brand, I was hardly even aware that the console existed. I had seen it once or twice at friends' houses, but I don't think I actually played anything on the console until my family moved to Florida. My uncle left his Xbox over at our new house for a few days or so, and I tried it out with the one game he had left with it, Dynasty Warriors 4. The game didn't leave much of an impression, but the console itself did. It felt foreign, alien, otherworldly. Its boot-up animation and the console's UI were imposing yet inviting, beckoning me to jump in. At the time, I was very much a PlayStation 2 kid. Give me my Simpsons Hit and Run, Jak and Daxter, Freakstyle, and Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2, and I was set. Same for Pokemon, which at this point was well into its 3rd generation. Not just because these were games I knew and loved, but because, as anyone who moved 1,000 miles away from the only home you knew as a child would tell you, media was practically the only remaining constant I had from where I grew up, aside from my family. In any case, I experienced major culture shock moving from Philadelphia to Jacksonville. The climate was different. The people were different. The area was different. I had a tremendously difficult time adjusting to it all. I went from being consistently on the honor roll back home to being a D student. I wasn't socializing well with my classmates. I was gradually becoming a more frustrated kid, and try as they might, my parents and teachers just were not equipped to handle it. It was around this time when I met the other kids who lived on my street. Most of them were a couple years younger than me, and even as I got to know them, I was still feeling that culture shock, but I did genuinely enjoy getting out of my house, riding my bike, and just strolling along the block as kids are wont to do. Sometimes when the weather wasn't great, we would go inside to play video games, and it was on one muggy day in November when I had my first encounter with what would become one of my most favorite games of all time. One of my friends shared a bedroom with his 16-year-old brother, Kenny. It was a bit cramped and cluttered as they tried to make the limited amount of space they had at least livable for the two of them. They slept in a bunk bed, the bottom of which Kenny had sat himself on, controller in hand as his eyes were locked onto the 12-inch TV perched atop the dresser a mere feet across from him. He was enraptured by his new game, hunched over so that he wouldn't bang his head against the bars above, but in his excitement he would still knock his cranium into them a couple of times. I was completely unfamiliar not just with what he was playing, but the type of game. You couldn't see your character. Instead, you just saw the gun in your hands. You shot aliens and protected humans aboard a space station until you found a spiky jelly bean or whatever and brought it out into space and used it to blow up an alien spaceship. It was the most unique and gorgeous game I had ever seen in my life, and that cutscene was absolutely mind-blowing to me. The industrial rhythm and the bombastic orchestral score had me just as entranced as the person playing it. I turned to Kenny and asked him, "What is this game?" "It's Halo 2, he told me as he handed me the metal case he retrieved from his mess of blankets. "It just came out today. Halo 2. So this was a sequel? There was another game like this?" The limited edition case in my hands only showed a stylized number 2 on the front and an armored soldier with a rifle, presumably the player character, on the back. Who is this guy? Kenny turned to me again as the screen began to show a bunch of military jeeps driving down a deserted highway. "That," he said, "is the Master Chief. So, you want to play?" I said no. Okay, well, I wanted to say yes, but first I asked the one question my parents advised me to ask whenever I was going to play a new game at a friend's house. "What's it rated?" Kenny told me it was rated M, and the grin that had been stretched across my face had just instantly dropped. I wasn't allowed to play M-rated games, and so I spent the rest of the day entranced as I watched the others play 3-player free-for-all with rocket launchers and energy swords on lockout and midship. I so desperately wanted to play, but I didn't want to disobey my parents. I asked them at dinner that night if I could play it, but when I told them it was rated M, they predictably said no. The next week seemed to pass by even more slowly than usual. All I could think about was this game. I wanted to swing swords and blast my friends with rockets. I yearned to fight that walking tank that was trudging through the city. I was desperate. I needed Halo. When the weekend finally arrived, I struggled through my homework so I could go back over to my friend's house. After an agonizing week of deliberation, I made the decision to throw caution to the wind. I was going to be player 4, and I was just awful at it. Rarely would I not be at the bottom of the scoreboard, but it's not like my friends were much better than me. The 3 of us playing together couldn't hope to beat Kenny. He just kept slaughtering us no matter what map or settings we played with. But rarely was I ever truly frustrated. I was having a total blast despite the small display making it difficult to see at times when it was split 4 ways. I distinctly remember Juggernaut being a favorite since it was a free-for-all game mode which still had an element of teamwork weaved into it. It was 3v1, but whoever killed the 1 became the new Juggernaut and had to defend themselves. Halo 2's maps were, and still are, some of my favorite in the series. Maybe it's the nostalgia talking, but I adored the variety in aesthetics, design, layouts, and even base concepts. Headlong is a city map, but also a construction site, with an array of buildings you can weave in and out of for close-quarter scuffles and plenty of perches to watch over so much of the open center. Midship is a simple, symmetrical arena where most of the action happens on the fringes rather than the center. The big exception is the upper platform where the energy sword spawns, because having an instant kill lunging weapon with unlimited ammo is obviously going to be sought after, even if its range is limited. Lockout is one of the series' GOATs, with a careful mix of indoor and outdoor spaces, close and long-range weapons, and all within a compact space that never feels suffocating. I also love the cold environment that gives contrast between indoor and outdoor areas, dark and cool blues outside and warm shades inside. Zanzibar is probably one of the best asymmetrical maps in the genre, with the beach team being given plenty of options to breach the enemy base, which gradually converge as you get closer to the objective, meaning that the defending team doesn't have to spread themselves too thin. Ascension's muted color palette and isolated setting beneath a gray sky instills in me both wonder and melancholy in equal measure. The massive underground cavern of waterworks? Beautiful. Simply beautiful. I love it. And that's without getting into how we would try and break the maps through things like super bounces. Burial Mounds and Headlong were our favorites for this. It was so surreal being able to see so much of the map from above, and even being able to peek outside the boundaries into the vast nothingness beyond the designated play area. And it's crazy to think that I mostly experienced this staring at a quarter of an already small screen. Those were the days. It went on like this for about a year or so. In that time, I was formally diagnosed with inattentive ADD and started medicating to little success. Eventually, one of my 4th grade classmates learned that I was really interested in Halo despite not owning an Xbox, and he threw his beat-up copy of The Fall of Reach at me. I mean, he literally threw it at me during a free period. He said I could keep it, and for years, this would be the only piece of Halo media I owned. In fact, I still have it. It was a marked departure from the Bionicle books I picked up at every Scholastic book fair, but one which I found endlessly fascinating even as a 10-year-old. It's an engaging read, even if the book itself doesn't engage all that deeply with the morality of kidnapping children to indoctrinate them into becoming killing machines. It would act as the foundational text for all of Halo's expanded universe media going forward, and those moral quandaries would eventually be explored in much greater depth therein. And back when I was 10, it was my first real step into the world and story of Halo. Getting an Xbox and the actual Halo games for myself was still out of the question. Video games in general were out of the question as far as my parents were concerned. I still owned a PS2 and GBA, but because of my poor grades, they were confiscated until the summer or until I had a good report card. So, until the summer. It was the summer of 2005 when I tried to emulate the experience of playing Halo as best I could through Star Wars Battlefront's first-person mode, but it wasn't the same. I still kept trying to go down the street whenever possible. We still did stuff outside, of course, but as my friends were becoming more and more interested in skateboarding and one of their dads built a small ramp for us, I became more and more incorrigible about playing Halo. Bear in mind, I still had yet to even touch the campaign, just split-screen multiplayer. But I had caught the bug nonetheless, and continued to be entranced whenever the others would play any of the campaign. I more or less got to experience the whole thing secondhand, if out of order, and without grasping much of what was going on, even after reading The Fall of Reach. How am I holding it this way? For Christmas 2005, another one of these friends would get both an Xbox, both Halos, and the Halo 2 multiplayer Mac Pack, and we spent a lot of 2006 having sleepovers and playing games on his Xbox, most specifically Halo. It was during one of these sleepovers that I would finally get the chance to play the campaign for myself, and my mission of choice wasn't Cairo Station, but Metropolis.
That isn't to say that I wasn't interested in the game's opening missions. I obviously was, but I had seen my friends blow through Cairo Station so many times by this point, and I was enamored with the scarab introduced at the beginning of Outskirts. Halo 2 does this thing where most of the game's missions are kind of split in half. Not including Heretic, the game's opening cutscene, the remaining 14 are more or less just 7 bisected stages. Cairo Station, for example, is the second part of the Armory, which is literally just there to teach players the basic movement controls. Similarly, Metropolis is the second half of Outskirts, which consists of a closed-off area to gun down enemies until 2 hunters blow some doors open to allow you to continue walking through the, well, outskirts of the African megacity of New Mombasa. This includes a trek through an alleyway filled with jackal snipers, who on legendary difficulty are the stuff of nightmares, and a drive along the beaches and through the city's enclosed highway tunnels. I remember my friends once showing me an energy sword that was hidden up in one of the buildings that was normally inaccessible, and through experiencing the path to it, I would eventually realize that you didn't have to deal with a good chunk of the level. You could skip right to the hotel, get in a warthog, and cruise to the end in no time flat, even on the notoriously unbalanced legendary difficulty. But it also got a lot of us thinking about what else might be hidden just out of sight in this game. Eventually, one of us would discover a skull tucked away above the beaten path on the mission Regret, not knowing why it was there, but we all thought it was pretty funny. Of course, you had to be playing on Legendary for it to appear, and it ended up turning all of the already insanely tough enemies invisible when we picked it up, but the prospect of beating them to death with a human skull was nothing short of hilarious to us. I didn't know it at the time, but Halo 2 has a lot of fun little secrets hidden outside the normal boundaries of its maps, including Metropolis. But the Scarab Gun and Soccer Ball weren't the allure of this mission to me. That would be the Scarab. The mission is much more focused on vehicles than Outskirts was, opening with you being given a Scorpion tank and several Marines with rocket launchers as you prepare to cross a massive bridge connecting the old city you just finished traversing into the mega city stretching into the rusty sky. This bridge section is a total power trip. Enemy vehicles, regardless of class, are helpless against you and your squad of rocket-toting pals, and after a quick firefight at the end of the tunnel ahead, you're greeted with the opportunity to drive a Warthog affixed with a Gauss cannon. Not as strong as a tank, but definitely powerful and fires much faster. The last stretch sees you abandoning your vehicles, unless you're really committed, and gearing up to jump down onto the Scarab yourself. It's a tense fight in relatively close quarters, and if you're not careful, you could fall off into the water below. And blaring in the background is the Mjolnir version of the Halo theme, juiced up with Steve Vai on the electric guitar to make you feel like the ultimate badass. What's more is that in the cutscene at the end, the Chief would hold the weapon you were using. A small touch, but it definitely goes a long way in supporting that power fantasy. Halo 2 was marketed as the battle for the fate of the Earth and humanity's last stand against the Covenant. But after Metropolis, that part of the story is left by the wayside. The Prophet of Regret's ship initiates a slipspace jump inside the city, and Commander Keyes' ship, the In Amber Clad, is only just barely able to make it into the portal to pursue the Prophet. The aftermath is simple, but breathtaking. In his act of cowardice, desperation, whatever you want to call it, Regret not only escaped a fight he may have had trouble winning, but leveled an entire city doing it in an absolutely breathtaking scene.
And so the cycle would continue up through the summer. Suffer through school, barely pass class, and then waste nights away playing free-for-all on Lockdown, Turf, Ascension, Colossus, Ivory Tower, etc., with the occasional opportunity to play a campaign mission here and there. One time I even got to play the opening mission of the first Halo, which was an interesting experience at the time because I had gotten so used to how Halo 2 felt that the original felt off to me at the time. But the good times were not to last. I was one of the oldest of this core group and started to go through puberty while still struggling to get a grip on my schoolwork and my new environment, even after 2 years. I was a raging ball of hormones that was quick to anger and get physical, and one of these outbursts led to the cutting of ties. I don't recall exactly what started it, but I know that it ended with me accidentally pushing one of them into some decor hanging on the wall, hurting his back, which made him cry, and I was told to leave. For what it's worth, he wasn't injured and there was no lasting damage to the wall or decor, but this was the end of my friendship with them. It was my fault. I was sorry, but sorry obviously was not good enough. His family did recognize that it was an accident though, and I did have fleeting encounters with his mother and sister out in public months and even years later, but that's about it. In hindsight, I don't think my friendship with them would have lasted anyway, simply due to how different we were, but that's beside the point. I entered the 6th grade that fall with nary a friend in the world, completely cut off from my latest hyperfixation. So I did what any 11-year-old in 2006 would do with their copious amount of free time when nothing else sounds appealing to them. I went on the internet to get as close to a fix as I could. And luckily for me, there was this fairly new video sharing platform that had an absolute glut of sketch comedy videos made using Halo 2. I may not have been able to play the game anymore, but in my desperation, I happened upon an entire subgenre of animation that was made using video game footage, and I fell in love with it. It was largely crass, unpolished, quasi-improvisational, and a lot of them had Scatman as background music, but it all came from a place of passion and unfettered creativity. For a bored preteen who didn't have an Xbox and would have had it taken away even if he did, Machinima was a fascinating glimpse into a part of Halo that I hadn't considered, that it could be a creative medium for its players as much as, if not more than, those who made it. The apex of this was Rooster Teeth's Red vs. Blue, the first 3 seasons of which I watched on MySpace Video. It was about as crunchy as any other Halo machinima at the time, but there was a confidence in the performances which elevated it beyond its contemporaries. The writing and jokes felt much tighter. The overall presentation had me forgetting that I was watching gameplay footage, despite there being no way to disable the heads-up display or activate a free cam mode. Bungie themselves recognized the machinima community even during Halo 2's development, as earlier builds that have made their way out into the wild show that there was a saved films feature that was planned but was ultimately cut. However, the feature would be revisited and expanded in Halo 3 with the theater mode, allowing players to not only play back their matches, but to do so in a free camera mode. The floodgates had opened, and I wanted to be a part of the fun. I got an Xbox 360 for Christmas 2007, and a few days later used my Christmas money to buy Halo 3. My parents, or more precisely my dad, had gotten over the whole no M-rated games thing the previous year when they had gotten me the Family Guy game that Christmas. I spent a weekend playing through the Halo 3 campaign, which I thought was pretty good but a bit short, but without friends for multiplayer, I didn't really play it for several months. I realized that Halo was a very social experience, and it was better with other people to share it with. I finally got Xbox Live in August 2008. I had to move my 360 into the spare bedroom and use a portable DVD player as a monitor, but the setup worked. The idea of playing games over the internet was still new and exciting, and I was ecstatic about not only downloading new maps for Halo 3, but being able to play games with other people around the world at any time. Not even the weirdo bragging about how he coated his genitals in peanut butter for his dog to lick off that I met in my first ever match could deter me from this. I didn't make that up, that actually happened. But connecting to Xbox Live also gave me access to a wider pool of people to help me make my own machinima. Between watching countless videos online from the likes of Rooster Teeth, John Graham, and Darkspire Films, and editing my own Kingdom Hearts AMVs on my mom's Windows Vista laptop, I had decided that I wanted to be a filmmaker, and making machinima with Halo was a way to tell relatively high-concept stories with no budget. I wouldn't get my first capture card, the classic Dazzle DVC 100, until that Christmas, and I wouldn't get it working on either my mom's laptop or the family's desktop until summer 2009. But once I got some kind of setup going, I was off to the races. I was finally able to make my own shorts and even continue a series for my small YouTube channel. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it, they were pretty bad. That really shouldn't come as a shock. I was 14. But that creative spark, the desire to tell stories, was unmistakably there. It's why I took TV production classes throughout high school, even doing a block period in my senior year. I submitted machinima to the local student film festival in their animation category and even won first prize one year. But more than anything, those classes got it into my head that filmmaking is a collaborative process. My abrasive personality wasn't going to get me very far. It took a bit for that message to really sink in, junior year or thereabouts, by which point my grades had improved significantly, but I ultimately became more relaxed. It was also at the end of my junior year when I would check in on a Bungie.net group I had joined years ago but had never really participated in. Lower the Guns. Created by Mitchell Stover, aka Bold Donut, LTG was founded early in Halo 3's life for the sole purpose of trying to convince Bungie to re-enable players' ability to lower their weapons during online play for the purposes of making the machinima making process easier. Not everyone has access to up to 4 Xbox 360s and 4 controllers for each of them to have a body acting session over System Link, and having all of your characters pointing weapons at each other during mundane conversation or adopting a linebacker stance breaks the illusion. When I opened the group page, I found that they had more or less disbanded and recongregated as a machinima forum called Machina Nation. I went there in search of not only more machinima to watch, but other like-minded people to help with my projects and to help with theirs. I made numerous friends there who I still regularly talk to and play games with today, but what brought us together at the start was Halo. We played Halo Reach deep into the night almost every night, helped each other body act for our machinima, and even went to RTX in 2014, 2016, and 2017. There was a brief period of time when I was deeply depressed about where I was in my life and basically lived to meet up with them all again, if just for that one weekend in Austin. As we started moving into our 20s, a few of us had come up with loftier ideas for machinima series that we wanted to pursue but needed help with polish and delegating parts of the workload to produce them in a timely manner. To that end, my friends Connor, Chris, and I started a new collaborative YouTube channel with the goal of helping each other with our projects. We would each ultimately put out our last big machinima projects this way between August 2017 and November 2020. The first of these projects, The Primus Legacy, was a condensed and pragmatic adaptation of a section of a novel that Chris was and still is writing today. It was highly polished and quite well received, so much so that those in a certain machinima community were disappointed to learn that the machinima adaptation would not be moving forward. Chris found that he was writing the book with the limitations of the game engine too much in mind, and didn't want to be constrained by the practicality of adaptation. I even remembered he shared an excerpt of the book with some of the people in this community who were confused by the script format, needing to be told that it wasn't a movie script. It was part of a novel's manuscript. Not the brightest bulbs. By the time Primus made its way into the world in machinima form, Connor had scrapped plans for a vehicular war series called Mechanical Mayhem in favor of something much less high concept but far more engaging, specifically for longtime Halo fans, but also for anyone who has ever cultivated meaningful human relationships over the internet. But to fully appreciate what he accomplished, I first want to shift back to Halo 2. I don't remember exactly when I acquired my own copy of Halo 2. I don't even know when I learned you could play a large swath of the original Xbox's library on the 360. I do know that I got a digital copy of the first Halo sometime between autumn '08 and spring '09. At the same time, I bought Halo 3's Legendary Map Pack for 600 Microsoft points. Wow, I am really dating myself saying that. In any case, I did get my own copy of Halo 2 from a local GameStop for, at most, $12. Though because my grades at the time were still pretty poor, I wasn't allowed to play my game consoles. That didn't stop me, of course, as I distinctly remember finally beating Halo 2 after months of playing it off and on when I wasn't supposed to have my 360. Perhaps the most controversial part of Halo 2's story at the time it was new, aside from its infamous cliffhanger ending, was the inclusion of a second player character in the Arbiter. He wasn't a part of the marketing. Nobody knew that after only a few missions you would be shifting perspectives from the Master Chief to one of the elites that players were conditioned to kill on sight. Of course, the opening cutscenes made it pretty obvious that this elite was going to be important and have some focus, but that's beside the point. I wasn't a part of online forum culture in any meaningful way until sometime in 2008, after I had gotten my copy of Halo 3, so my understanding of the controversy surrounding the Arbiter and Halo 2's ending are entirely secondhand. So when I finally beat Halo 2 for myself, after I had finished Halo 3, my feelings about both were in no way indicative of others circa 2004. I had known about the Arbiter, of course, from watching my neighbors playing the campaign, but I didn't quite grasp the particulars and nuances of his character until much, much later. I liked the Arbiter. I felt that getting his perspective made the Covenant more interesting. He failed to protect the Halo ring from the first game, and we live out his punishment. And I say that not just as a descriptor of the narrative, but also for his missions.
The Arbiter sections, while narratively and thematically the most engaging, also have most of the game's weakest sections and set pieces. This is partially due to 3 of the game's 4 Flood levels belonging to him, and the Flood are just really annoying to fight because of how aggressive they are. But there's also a lot of waiting for elevators to descend, doors to unlock, gondolas to move, things like that. His missions can be a bit of a slog. But the Arbiter himself is an engaging and sympathetic character with an actual arc. He was a religious zealot who commanded respect from those around him until the Master Chief, the other player character, destroyed the holy object he was supposed to protect. He's punished by the same peers who had previously shown him nothing but adulation, branded a heretic, and sentenced to death for something that the player did. But he's given a chance at redemption. The High Prophets allow him to become their arbiter, an extension of their will, so that he may find forgiveness through dealing with matters of the utmost importance to preserving their covenant. The expectation is that these missions will see him die, and only through death will he be forgiven for his heresy, and he's on board with it because it's in accordance with his faith. Through the simultaneous journeys of the Master Chief and the Arbiter, the Covenant begins to unravel. The latter's first mission tests his faith as he's tasked with assassinating a true heretic, one who has actually denounced the Covenant and wrangled some other elites and grunts to join him. As the Arbiter learns during his confrontation with the heretic leader, his blasphemous ideas came from 343 Guilty Spark, the monitor from the Halo he failed to protect. The Covenant revere the monitors as oracles, as they're one of the few relics the Forerunners left behind which are actually sentient and can communicate with them directly. Spark obviously told the heretic that the Covenant's religion is nothing but bunk, that the rings are superweapons, etc., etc. The Arbiter is willing to listen to the Oracle before the heretic leader opens fire on him because reasons. Tartarus, the brute chieftain, handles the Oracle in a less than delicate fashion, which clearly perturbs the Arbiter, but acquiring it has led the Covenant to another Halo, where the Arbiter is tasked with acquiring the sacred icon that will allow them to activate the ring and initiate the Great Journey, which in their religion is the path to enlightenment and godhood. But when he gets there, he's betrayed by Tartarus on the orders of the prophets. The Master Chief's murder of the Prophet of Regret shook Truth and Mercy, who fear that the elites can't be trusted to protect them since they failed to protect Regret. The Brutes had already begun to assume the Honor Guard positions aboard High Charity before the Arbiter was briefed for this mission, and thus a schism had begun to form within the Covenant's caste hierarchy. The betrayal doesn't open the Arbiter's eyes to the rotten evil within the Covenant, but it's still cutting to him, and the Gravemind presenting him with evidence of his religion being, knowingly or not, a death cult, isn't enough for him to completely shake the decades of indoctrination. It's only after making a temporary pact with Sergeant Johnson to stop Tartarus from firing the ring, and learning directly from Guilty Spark that, yes, the rings are meant to wipe out all sentient life in the galaxy, does the Arbiter finally accept that the religion he had followed for his entire life was a lie. And Keith David's delivery of this realization is heartbreaking.
Tartarus, the prophets have betrayed us.
It's the Arbiter's journey that makes Halo 2's story feel complete to me. He's the main protagonist here, rather than the Chief. He got a full 3 acts. The story ending with his realization that his beliefs were lies is beautifully tragic, and that's what sticks with me the most. The Arbiter is irreversibly changed after the events of Halo 2. He can no longer go back to being the person he was before. Even if he were to be granted his rank and command back from before the story began and forgiven of any alleged heresy, he now knows what it is that the Covenant seeks to do, even if they don't know it themselves. Things aren't the same anymore. They can't be. No matter how much you try and recreate the idyllic dream of the past, eventually, you'll have to wake up.
On February 5th, 2010, it was announced that the original Xbox Live service would be discontinued in the coming spring. Halo 2, among countless other titles, would have their online features turned off after April 15th. Thousands of players would come together for one final hurrah when the time came, and while I was among those who played a handful of matches in the weeks leading up to the closure, I wasn't there on the final day. When the servers were brought down, my online service record consisted of a mere 24 matches between August 2008 and April 2010. By the time I got my Xbox 360, Halo 2 was well out of date. My friends and I were playing Halo 3, and when I actually got my own copy of Halo 2, I had grown so used to its sequel that the sheen had dulled. Yet I was still sad to see it taken offline. I was quietly cheering on the noble 14 who kept it alive, if even for themselves, for several weeks after it was supposed to be shut down. And evidently, so was my friend Connor. In August 2018, we released Endgame, a dramatization of those final days of Halo 2, made using Halo 2 Anniversary. It was a bittersweet meditation on the immaterial yet significant nature of online friendships, how friends can grow apart, and learning to let go of the past in the face of an uncertain future. Chris and I helped punch up the dialogue, and I did the color grading on it, but there was one thing I was really pushing for early on that Connor shut down. I wanted it to be made in Halo 2 Classic. It just seemed right to me at the time. But after sitting down to watch a nearly finished cut, I realized that using the anniversary version with classic bookends was the right call. Released as part of the Master Chief Collection in 2014 to celebrate Halo 2's 10th anniversary, Halo 2 Anniversary Multiplayer was a shinier, slightly modernized take on classic Halo 2 multiplayer. It's really good, but it's not Halo 2, and that was to Endgame's benefit. Anniversary's theater mode made it more practical to actually make the machinima, but the brighter colors and higher fidelity graphics ended up representing how these older, nostalgic games felt at the time and when playing with your friends. It's only when that nostalgic veneer is gone, when Apache's friends aren't around anymore, that he can see Halo 2 for what it really was. Of course, Endgame was made using the Master Chief Collection, which brought Halos 1 through 4 and then ODST and Reach to a new console and later to PC. So now I can relive those glory days indefinitely, right?
Well, here's the thing. You can take the old software and convert it to work on new hardware. You can recreate the same conditions under which you experienced it the first time, but it's not going to be the same. And it can never be the same. Times change, people change, places change. At the time I'm recording this, I'm on my way up to Rhode Island, but I wanted to stop off in Philadelphia for a day because I rarely get this chance. It's my home. It's the place I grew up. But as I walked around and looked at the places that I've been, the roads I've walked, I hardly recognized a lot of it. A lot changed. I was disheartened to find that my old neighborhood had a lot of the trees cut down. The Neshaminy Mall, where for my 4th birthday got my Game Boy Color and a used copy of Pokemon Red, is practically a ghost town. The Oxford Valley Mall wasn't much better, and that was the place where I got my first Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Ruby. My favorite diner, Michael's, is this upscale eating establishment called Blue Sunday, and I don't know how to really feel about that one. And so much of the family that I've had has either passed away or been alienating. I used to think this place was my home, but now I'm not sure I really have a home anymore.
This video is the third of a trilogy, with the first video being about Tony Hawk's Underground and the second about the original DBZ Broly movie. As seemingly disconnected as these subjects may be, they're all connected by a single idea, that no matter what, I can't fully replicate the same feelings I had when I first experienced them, and the way that newcomers will engage with them will be inherently different because the methodology of accessibility or the context surrounding them has changed significantly. Sure, you can easily access them in some way, you can emulate Underground, and you can stream the original Broly, but if you didn't grow up in the late 90s or early 2000s, then the former isn't going to hit the same way, and the latter's focal character has been reinterpreted to great success, so the original now exists in its shadow, inviting comparisons simply through existing.
As for Halo 2, we've been spoiled.
Setting aside that the version in the MCC is based on the Windows Vista port from 2007, which had its own minor quirks and differences from the original Xbox version, playing it at higher resolutions and especially frame rates has absolutely ruined the Xbox version for me. It feels much more sluggish and less responsive than playing it at 144 FPS on my PC or at 90 FPS on my Steam Deck, and that's without even getting into the remastered graphics, which, while better than the first game's remaster in my opinion, doesn't click with me. It doesn't feel right. And the pre-rendered cutscenes from Blur, while gorgeous, don't have quite the same cinematic flair or solid pacing as the original cutscenes. Thankfully, I don't have to play with the new graphics, but all of these updates and flourishes that come with the most readily accessible version of the game do affect how we engage with and discuss it.
That's not to say that it's wrong that you didn't experience this media the same way I experienced it. That's totally fine. But it highlights a certain sobering truth that I think that we are loath to acknowledge. And that is, no matter how hard you try, you can never go home again.
All of my grandparents are gone. Rooster Teeth is gone. Neversoft is gone. Funimation was absorbed into Crunchyroll. Bungie and Halo are both shells of what they used to be. As we get older, those pillars of the past crumble and fade, some for good reason, but others, well, it hurts to watch. But that doesn't mean you can't find joy where you are now. When I first played Halo 2 20 years ago, I had no idea I would meet so many people and make decades-long friendships because of it. I didn't think it would lead me to finding what I wanted out of life. I certainly didn't think it'd be the catalyst for a navel-gazy YouTube video like this with an audience of over 20,000 people at the time I record this. Had I not crossed paths with this game back then, this channel probably wouldn't exist. I'm not sure where I would be or what I would be doing, but I don't think it's worth pondering where I would be without it when I can appreciate where I am and where I'm going because of it. And right now, that's with my friends. No matter how far apart from each other we are, or how busy our lives get, enjoying each other's company, whether that be in person or online, feels like coming home. Like no time has passed at all. And I have Halo 2 to thank for all of that.
Da da da